So having said that, our next speaker is Nick Gvosdov, and he comes to us from beautiful Newport and the Naval War Academy.
He's a former OCL board member.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. The last time I spoke to an OCL gathering was 12 years ago in Dallas, so it's nice to be back. Because I'm now a federal employee and we're recording this, I am required to give the disclaimer, not that I think that the U.S. government has much interest in Orthodox issues, but these are my own private opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the War College or the U.S. government. With that in mind, I'm glad that Michael and Marilyn went first because they presented a very positive vision of where Orthodoxy can go in the future in the United States. Internal renewal, both of parishes through ministry and prayer, IOCC and the other agencies as examples of where Orthodox can work together and can have results. Unfortunately, I'm going to be more of the negative person here at the party with some of the bad news that I think we have to confront. We have to look particularly at some worrying demographic trends that will face the Orthodox Church in the next number of years and not kind of wish around it, but have to begin to looking at how we're going to adapt. And let me start first by, if people have not already consulted the research, that's excellent research that's been done by Alex Krindach of the Patriarch Athenagoras Institute. Because Krindach is not relying on kind of what the jurisdictions like to say, but is actually looking at facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground are a little less positive than we'd like to think. How many Orthodox in the United States? Not 6 million, not 3 million, 1.3 million, and of that, maybe 700,000 considered to be active members of the church. So not even 1 million people in the United States in terms of active membership in Orthodox congregations, of which about 350,000 in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, and the rest concentrated primarily in the OCA and the Antiochians and the Serbians, and then smaller groups there. What the numbers tell us: large outmigration from several generations of cradle Orthodox that have not returned to the church, so we're not seeing large numbers of reverts, as we like to call them, people who come from Orthodox families coming back in. Also a very hidden trend that we have not wanted to look at is convert outmigration. We're very good at trumpeting, welcome home, someone got chrismated, and then we kind of have the old Ottoman view that you've now changed your millet, and now you're Orthodox, and you're Orthodox forever, and your family's Orthodox forever. It's not the way it works in the American situation. We are fluid in our religious identities. Children do not stick with the religious identities of their parents. We have been seeing, anecdotally, because it's not been studied, but that converts in some cases leave Orthodoxy. They go back to their earlier faith traditions. Particularly noticeable outmigration have been people back to the conservative Anglican movement. That is, people who were Episcopalians, entered the Orthodox Church in the 70s and 80s and 90s because of concerns about where the Episcopal Church was going, did not find a good fit with Orthodoxy, and now have a home in the traditional Anglican movement where they can move through. We don't have quantity, we can't quantify these figures, but they are there, and it is something we have to look at. Because the numbers, Krindach's numbers, tell us that if we count up all the people that have been chrismated since 1970, we should be dealing with larger numbers of people, not the 700,000 to 1.3 million. So there has been a phenomenon of convert outmigration that we do need to look at. And one of the things also from Krindach's study, 21st century Orthodox America, the biggest source of growth, and we heard it in the last panel, Orthodoxy has doubled. Immigration is still immigration from the Orthodox heartlands is driving growth of parishes here. Not huge waves of Americans converting to Orthodoxy. And you know, ever since I was, now that I can claim that I'm middle-aged, but ever since I was a child, at various points, you know, we've had the idea of the great wave coming into Orthodoxy. First it was the Episcopalians, then it was the Evangelical Orthodox, then it was the Vineyard Fellowship. Then it was Byzantine Catholics that were disaffected with Rome and were going to come in, particularly among the Ruthenian Rite. They were going to be the new wave in. Then it was the Charismatic Episcopals, I think, is the newest candidate that people go around and say, well, that's the next group that will come in. The reality is that groups do convert to Orthodoxy. We do get people coming into the church, but I think, as it also came out from the last panel, what is happening more often is that Orthodoxy is kind of like yeast that goes into the American religious environment. We populate more of the Christian traditions, are borrowing things from Orthodoxy. They like our icons, they like our liturgical music, they like our centering and silent prayer. And so they'll pull things out of the Orthodox tradition. So I think what trend line we're going to see in the future that is somewhat contradictory is the numbers of Orthodox may not be increasing by large amounts, but we are going to see more of Orthodoxy becoming more prominent and becoming more a tradition in the American religious scene, but it will be Episcopalians borrowing from Orthodoxy. It will be Catholics. If you've been in a Roman Rite church, it's not the Byzantine Catholics, but the Roman Rite Catholics now are in love with our icons, and you see them in churches and the like. Lutherans are pulling icons in. Baptists are rediscovering liturgy. So they're pulling from us. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to all come into Orthodoxy. So I think that's a trend we have to look at. When we look at what's going to happen in terms of the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to have real issues in our parish communities with dealing with the next wave of Orthodox migration. We can see it happening now. 2 million or so people coming out of Russia. There's been increased immigration out from Russia again, particularly of the middle class. Same to a lesser extent from Ukraine. The financial crisis in Europe is leading to more Romanians, Bulgarians, and Greeks saying, should we be thinking about immigrating elsewhere? And of course the crisis in the Middle East with the destruction of the Christian community of Iraq, the likely fate of the Orthodox in Syria should Assad fall, continued unrest in Lebanon, and of course what's happening in Egypt. All of this is going to produce a new wave of Orthodox migrants to the United States. What's going to happen when they come to parishes? Because we've known how this script is played before, because it happened in the 1920s, where immigrants coming in displaced Americans and displaced converts in some cases, where parishes that were using English in 1917 are now using Slavonic in 1925, because immigration has changed the nature of the parish and who does it serve. So what happens there? But there's a difference with the new immigrants, particularly in this case, what I'm most familiar with is the immigration from the former Soviet Union. When we often think of our Orthodox migrant forebears, we think of pious peasants, right? You know, right? We heard it this morning. You know, my papu was illiterate, but he was, you know, versed in the faith, and he gave it to me, and that passed it on. A lot of your new migrants coming in from the former Soviet Union are de-churched people. They are not instinctively Orthodox. They understand that Orthodoxy is their historic faith. They don't have much of a connection to it. So a lot of what happens in this country with new immigrants is not just simply welcome to the church, it's welcome to Orthodoxy. We have to sort of redo or make up for what 2, 3, 4 generations of atheism in the former Soviet Union did. So the question there is that when immigrants come in, are our parish communities, so the one risk is immigrants come in and they displace the Americans. The other risk is that immigrants come in, say, I don't really know much about Orthodoxy, the parish can't really help me about Orthodoxy, so why shouldn't I just go to another faith tradition? And for example, in South Florida, there are several very well-funded Russian Protestant ministries that are active in their evangelical zeal among the Russian population. And essentially it's, well, you don't understand Orthodoxy, so why don't you come with us? So the risk there is that we could have a whole new migration of people coming in that we could lose to Orthodoxy if we do not have ministries in place. And so it will require our parish communities to be much more agile in the next 20 years. How do you strike the balance between keeping the people that we have now and making outreach to converts, making outreach to people, the reverts as they're called, to come back, and then at the same time incorporate new waves of migration coming in so that those people don't flow out of Orthodoxy. So I think that we have a real challenge there. Let me take the last section of my time and focus on another question, which is that of what happens to jurisdictions. I think, unfortunately, or however you want to phrase it, I don't think we're going to see the idea of a single united territorial church in the United States anytime soon. For the same reason that the predictions in 1960 about how we were going to have a unified Orthodox Church by 1980 did not come to pass. It is not that people don't recognize the canonical irregularities of the situation, but that the jurisdictions have begun to serve some needs in American Orthodoxy. And there are two needs in particular. We heard from His Grace earlier today about wide differences in practice between different jurisdictions. And what we're seeing, particularly in the last 10 years, is some degree of self-selection of American Orthodox looking at different jurisdictions to provide specific Orthodox traditions and identities. There's kind of orthodoxy in a very global sense, but then there's the idea of, well, I want an orthodoxy that, say, reflects the Russian tradition of the 18th and 19th centuries, or I want an Orthodox tradition that is the Kievan tradition, or I want an Orthodox tradition that kind of harkens back to, you know, the Antiochian experience in the early church. And so what's happening with jurisdictions is the ability to move away from purely ethnic origins and to say it's not just simply this jurisdiction is here to serve people of a particular ethnic background. It can also be the reinvention of jurisdictions as representing specific traditions within Orthodoxy that appeal to people within who are either Orthodox already or who are coming into Orthodoxy. And there has been some degree of where the jurisdictions exist as pressure valves, where people who are not satisfied with the orthodoxy that is interpreted a particular way in one jurisdiction ask for or are released to another jurisdiction. We've seen this, for example, in the Antiochian church in recent years with not simply just priests, but even a bishop released and moving to another jurisdiction because of differences in interpretation, because of differences in practice. We have seen the emergence of, I'm familiar with this from up in Rhode Island, where a very interesting development in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which traditionally was a very ethnocentric jurisdiction and still has very ethnic parishes, Ukrainian parishes, but where there is now this image of a Kievan tradition, which is very appealing, and there are parishes now in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that are primarily convert parishes. We can see the same phenomenon certainly in the OCA, in ROCOR, and in other jurisdictions as well, where people come in, and they come into Orthodoxy and then they identify with a jurisdiction's discipline, with its traditions, with its outlook on Orthodoxy. So if we're talking about unity, it may be that we're going to have to talk about unity being a very decentralized unity in America, which has a lot more diversity in it rather than a top-down, here's a single territorial church with one synod of bishops and one translation, going back to Chris's points about common translations, but people are attached to their differing translations, and we've seen this. I'm actually attending a Greek Orthodox parish in Newport because it is the closest parish. I do go on occasion for the OCA parish, and I go on occasion to the ministry at the University of Rhode Island, which the Ukrainian Orthodox priest in Rhode Island is the chaplain, but there's Orthodox parish that is 5 minutes from where I live, as opposed to a parish that is an hour away. It makes sense to go to the local parish. They made a change in the liturgy books, and just little changes from an older translation to the Holy Cross book, and people were up in arms. Well, you changed the creed. Well, this isn't how we used to sing it. And so you think that even in one jurisdiction, that the change from one book to another can provoke such passion. It made me understand the old believers in Russia a lot more. I was a lot more appreciative of the position of the old believers after that, with their attachment to specific terms and language and tradition. But these are things that will have to be navigated. And I will make this, since I have 13 minutes, let me make my last point. One other thing we do have to be concerned about, and this goes to the transparency and accountability issues, is we heard a little bit this morning about First Amendment and the courts and the like, and it's true that American courts do not rule on matters of internal church governance. But courts are increasingly getting involved when you have cover-ups, you have problems with sexual abuse, and those of you who knew my mother knew that one of her signature issues ahead was to really say we have to wake up and face these issues because we can't go down the same road that the Catholics do. We saw what happened with the Catholic Church. There's going to be a need for continued emphasis on transparency and accountability in all of the jurisdictions and within them. Otherwise, as we've now seen with some of these devastating judgments issued against the Catholic Church, now with precedent being set, the Catholic Church is finding it difficult to pay off some of these things. Just imagine what happens in the next 10 years, particularly with statute of limitations, if we have similar cases coming to court, and with the court with case law now already in place for very large judgments perhaps to be handed against our churches for misconduct or for concealing scandals and the like. And so this is one of the trend areas where we also do need to be aware of, is to make sure that we're putting in place the things that will, and it's not just simply because the American government wants us to do this. Goes back to our own canons. Our own canons have a lot about accountability and how you're supposed to hold people accountable. So it's a nice marriage of kind of what's happening in America and a return to our own traditions. But this is another area, a trend line we do need to be aware of, is what the Catholic Church has gone through. If we don't take some of the steps to avert that, we will go down the same road that the Catholic Church has done. And that has not been very good for the health of the Catholic Church in this country. So if we can avoid following in their footsteps, that's definitely something for us to do.